The courtroom smelled faintly of paper, polish, and quiet endings. I sat at the wooden table, fingers wrapped tightly around a thin folder that contained everything I now owned, a few personal documents, my passport, and the final decree dissolving 12 years of marriage. Across the room, Daniel looked confident, almost relaxed, as if he were attending a business meeting rather than the collapse of a life we once built together. When the judge asked if I agreed to the settlement terms, my lawyer shifted beside me. I could feel his tension, the silent plea for me to reconsider. The documents were stacked in front of Daniel's attorney like a monument to possession. The Coastal House, both cars, our joint savings, retirement accounts, and full ownership of the design firm that had taken years of sleepless nights to grow. "Yes, Your Honor," I said quietly. The words seemed to echo longer than they should have. The judge paused, glancing over her glasses. "You understand you are relinquishing all shared marital assets." "I understand." My lawyer exhaled slowly, defeated. Daniel didn't speak, but I saw the corner of his mouth lift, not quite a smile, but something close to satisfaction. He had always appreciated efficiency. Clean outcomes. Winning without mess. The gavel struck once. Just like that, it was over. Outside the courthouse, a sharp winter wind cut through my coat. Daniel's car waited at the curb, the black sedan we had chosen together, because he said it projected authority. His driver opened the rear door for him. Daniel paused only long enough to adjust his cufflinks before stepping inside. He did not look back. I stood on the sidewalk holding my folder against my chest while pedestrians hurried past, unaware that my entire life had just been reduced to a stack of paper and a silence I didn't yet understand. Friends would later say I should have fought harder. My sister would call it madness. Even my lawyer had asked 3 separate times if I was being pressured. But the truth was simpler. I wasn't losing everything. I was letting it go. As a taxi splashed through a puddle near the curb, icy water soaked the hem of my trousers. I barely noticed. The cold air filled my lungs, sharp and unfamiliar, like stepping into a world I had forgotten existed. For the first time in years, no one was waiting to tell me what I should say, where I should go, or how I should feel. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. From something dangerously close to freedom. Daniel believed he had won. He had no idea what he had really taken. And he never once asked why I let him. From the outside, our marriage looked like a magazine spread. We lived in a glass-front coastal home where the ocean shimmered like polished silver at sunrise. The driveway curved elegantly toward a slate stone entrance, and inside, every surface reflected careful taste, minimalist furniture, curated artwork, soft lighting designed to flatter every gathering. Guests often paused in the foyer, whispering admiration as if they had stepped into a luxury resort rather than someone's home. Daniel loved those reactions. He thrived on them. Our design firm had grown into one of the most sought-after boutique studios in the region. We specialized in high-end interiors for clients who wanted more than style. They wanted identity, status, a signature aesthetic. Our calendars were booked months in advance, and waiting lists only made our reputation stronger. At parties, Daniel moved through the crowd with effortless authority, a hand resting lightly on my back as he introduced me. "My wife, the creative force behind our success," he would say. People smiled at me with admiration. Some even asked for advice, complimenting my eye for color and texture. I would return their smiles politely, answering in measured sentences while Daniel steered conversations back toward contracts and numbers. He liked being the voice of the business. Over time, he became the only voice. Inside our home, conversations were efficient and strategic, like meetings with invisible agendas. Daniel didn't shout. He never slammed doors or raised his hand in anger. Instead, he perfected a quieter method of control. He corrected. He redirected. He improved. "That color palette feels too emotional," he once said, glancing at my sketches without looking up from his tablet. "Clients want timeless, not sentimental." Another time, as I dressed for a charity gala, he paused in the doorway. "The blue is too soft. Wear the black. It communicates strength." He spoke as if he were refining a brand rather than speaking to his wife. At first, I believed he was helping me grow, sharpening my instincts, strengthening my professional image. I trusted his confidence. He seemed certain in ways I never felt. Gradually, my choices became suggestions awaiting approval. My laughter softened. My opinions shortened. My world narrowed to what worked best for Daniel's vision. Friends still envied our life. Social media showed sunset dinners on the terrace, champagne glasses catching the light, smiling photos framed by ocean horizons. Comments poured in. Perfect couple. Relationship goals. Living the dream. No one saw how quiet the house became after guests left. No one heard the silence at dinner when there was nothing strategic to discuss. No one noticed how often I stood at the window, watching waves collapse against the rocks below, feeling something inside me erode in the same slow rhythm. By the time I realized what was happening, I had stopped asking myself what I wanted. It was easier that way. Daniel wasn't cruel. He was precise. And little by little, without either of us naming it, I disappeared from the life everyone else admired. It was a Thursday night in late autumn, the kind where the ocean wind pressed softly against the windows and the house seemed wrapped in a hush that felt almost peaceful. Daniel had retreated to his office after dinner, as he often did, claiming he needed to review contracts before the morning meeting. I rinsed the last glass in the sink and stood there longer than necessary, listening to the quiet stretch through the hallways. The house was beautiful at night. Soft lighting glowed along the walls, and the distant rhythm of waves against the rocks below created a steady, calming pulse. From the outside, it looked like serenity. Inside, something felt hollow. I carried a cup of tea down the hallway, intending to leave it outside Daniel's office door, a small habit formed years earlier, when gestures still felt meaningful. As I approached, I heard his voice through the partially closed door. He wasn't speaking in his professional tone. He was laughing. I froze. "I'm telling you," he said, his voice low and amused. "She'll sign. She always does." A pause. Then a softer chuckle. "No, there won't be a fight. She hates conflict. That's one of her best qualities." My fingers tightened around the mug. I didn't breathe. Another pause, followed by the faint scratch of his pen against paper. "Yes, once it's finalized, everything transfers cleanly. The company's structure already favors me. It'll be simple." Simple. The word echoed in my chest like something breaking. I stepped backwards silently, careful not to let the floorboards creak. The tea trembled in my hands as I returned to the kitchen and set the cup on the counter. Steam curled upward, disappearing into the air like something that had never existed. For several minutes, I stood motionless, staring at the smooth marble surface. "She'll sign. She always does." The words repeated, not cruel, not angry, just certain. Spoken with the confidence of someone describing gravity or sunrise. A fact. Not a partnership. Not a marriage. A certainty. I walked upstairs slowly and sat on the edge of the bed. The room felt staged, like a photograph in a catalog. Perfect pillows, neutral tones, nothing out of place. I looked around and realized there was no evidence of me here. No books I loved, no sketches pinned to walls, no colors I would have chosen. Even the space meant for rest had been curated. By midnight, Daniel came to bed and fell asleep within minutes, his breathing steady and untroubled. I lay beside him staring into the darkness, feeling something shift deep inside me. Not explosive, not dramatic, but quiet and irreversible, like ice cracking across a frozen lake. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was awake. As the hours passed, I understood with startling clarity that I was not a partner in my own life. I had become an accessory to someone else's design, agreeable, polished, and silent. The ceiling above me faded slowly from darkness to gray as dawn approached. And somewhere between midnight and morning, I stopped waiting for my life to change. I decided I would change it myself. I didn't confront Daniel the next morning. I didn't ask questions, raise my voice, or demand explanations. If there was one thing I had learned during our marriage, it was that Daniel excelled in arguments. He approached conflict like a strategist approaches negotiation, calm, prepared, and always several steps ahead. No, confrontation would only strengthen his position. Silence, however, gave me space. So I kissed him on the cheek, wished him a productive day, and watched from the kitchen window as his black sedan disappeared down the curved driveway. The ocean wind rattled the glass softly, and for the first time in years, I felt as though I were standing inside a moment that belonged entirely to me. That was the morning I began leaving. Not physically, not yet, but deliberately. I started with small, practical steps. I gathered my personal documents and stored digital copies in a private cloud account Daniel didn't know existed. My passport, birth certificate, academic records, and professional certifications were scanned and organized into encrypted folders. It felt methodical, almost clinical, as though I were preparing files for a client rather than reclaiming pieces of my own identity. Next came the design archives. Our firm's reputation had been built on signature elements clients recognized instantly: layered textures, bold contrasts softened by organic accents, and lighting that created intimacy without sacrificing scale. Daniel handled contracts and negotiations, but the creative direction, the concepts clients fell in love with, had always come from my sketchbook. For years, I had saved original drafts and concept files on an external drive, a habit born from artistic caution rather than foresight. Now, I cataloged them carefully, adding timestamps, notes, and proof of authorship. Each file felt like a fragment of myself returned. In the afternoons, while Daniel believed I was reviewing vendor lists, I began sketching again. Not for clients. For me. At first, my hand hesitated over the paper, as though unsure it still remembered how to move freely. The lines were tentative, restrained by years of refinement and restraint. But gradually, curves became more fluid, colors more daring, shapes less obedient to market trends. Emotion returned to my work. Life returned to my work. Daniel had once dismissed this style as too personal to sell. Now, I wondered if that had been precisely why it mattered. I also opened a new email account under my maiden name. It felt strange typing it after so many years, like reintroducing myself to a version I had almost forgotten. I created professional profiles, secure domain names, and quietly researched independent business licensing requirements. Each small task felt like placing a stone in a path only I could see. At dinner, Daniel spoke about restructuring the company to improve efficiency. I nodded at appropriate moments, asking neutral questions that satisfied his need for agreement. He seemed relaxed, confident in the predictable rhythm of our life. He believed nothing had changed. Meanwhile, I was learning to breathe without permission. Weeks passed, then months. The house remained immaculate. Our social calendar continued. Clients praised our professionalism. To anyone watching, we were still the same successful couple navigating an enviable life. But beneath the polished surface, something irreversible was unfolding. I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't preparing for war. I was preparing for freedom. And Daniel, certain of my compliance, never once noticed that I had already begun to leave. By the time Daniel suggested we discuss the future, I was no longer surprised. We sat across from each other at the dining table, the same table where we had hosted investors, celebrated contracts, and toasted anniversaries with crystal glasses and polite smiles. That evening, there were no candles, no music, no pretense of warmth. Only a leather folder in front of him and a tone of professional calm I recognized from boardroom meetings. "I think it's time we consider a structured separation," he said, folding his hands as if presenting a quarterly report. "It would be efficient for both of us." Efficient. The word landed softly, without cruelty. Daniel did not believe he was being harsh. In his mind, he was being practical, solving a problem with minimal disruption. I studied his face, searching for hesitation, regret, or even discomfort. There was none. Only certainty. "I understand," I replied. Relief flickered briefly in his eyes. He had expected resistance. Instead, he found cooperation, the role I had played for years. Within days, attorneys were involved. The conference room where negotiations began was neutral and windowless, designed to discourage emotion. My lawyer, Mr. Hargrove, was meticulous and direct, a man who valued fairness and documentation. Daniel's attorney carried an air of polished confidence that suggested long familiarity with high-asset divorces. Documents were arranged. Pens aligned. Voices measured. Then the demands began. Daniel sought full ownership of the house, citing proximity to the firm's primary client base. He requested both vehicles for business and travel efficiency. He proposed retaining the entirety of our shared savings to stabilize company operations during the transition. He also wanted the design firm and my retirement fund, even the antique dining set my grandmother had left me, listed as an asset contributing to the home's aesthetic value. Mr. Hargrove's pen stopped moving. He leaned slightly toward me. "We can contest these terms," he murmured. "You are entitled to significantly more." Across the table, Daniel remained composed, reviewing a document as if the outcome were already settled. I felt no surge of anger, no urge to defend possessions. Instead, a strange clarity settled over me, as calm as still water. "Is this acceptable?" Daniel's attorney asked. My lawyer's hand rested lightly on my arm, a quiet anchor urging caution. I looked at the pages detailing everything Daniel believed mattered. Walls, accounts, objects, structures. He was negotiating for a life made of things. "I agree," I said. Mr. Hargrove turned toward me, stunned. "You don't have to do this." "I know." Daniel looked up then, surprise flashing for a fraction of a second before satisfaction replaced it. He masked it quickly, but I saw it. The subtle easing of his shoulders, the confirmation of his expectations. He believed he had secured victory. He believed my compliance meant weakness. What he did not understand was that I was not surrendering. I was selecting what not to carry forward. The meeting concluded with signatures and polite handshakes. Outside, the late afternoon sky hung low and gray, pressing the city into quiet submission. My lawyer walked beside me toward the elevator. "You're walking away from a fortune," he said gently. I tightened my grip on the folder in my hands. "No," I replied. "I'm walking away from a cage." Upstairs, Daniel finalized paperwork with efficient precision. He thought he had taken everything that mattered, and he never once thought to ask what I was choosing to keep. The apartment smelled faintly of fresh paint and old dust, an odd combination that lingered in the narrow hallway as I pushed the door open with my shoulder. The lock stuck slightly before turning, as if unused to being trusted. When it finally clicked, the sound echoed through the empty space like a small announcement. "You are here now." This was home. Not the oceanfront glass house with its sweeping views and curated lighting. Not the polished floors or custom furniture chosen to impress visitors. This was a third-floor walk-up in a quiet neighborhood, with cracked tile near the kitchenette and a single window overlooking the blank brick wall of the building next door. I stepped inside and set my suitcase down in the center of the room. The silence felt different here, not heavy, not tense, not waiting to be filled with expectation. It simply existed. For a long moment, I stood still, listening to the faint sounds of distant traffic and footsteps from the apartment above. Someone laughed down the hall. A door shut. Life moved around me in ordinary rhythms, unconcerned with status, image, or performance. I exhaled slowly. There was no driver waiting outside. No schedule on the counter. No calendar filled with obligations designed to impress. Just space. My belongings fit into 2 suitcases and 3 cardboard boxes. Clothes. A few personal books I had stored away years earlier. Sketch pads. A small wooden box containing photographs from before my marriage, images of a younger version of myself smiling without calculation. I placed the photos on the windowsill, propping them against the glass. The brick wall beyond the window reflected muted afternoon light, turning the room a soft shade of amber. It wasn't beautiful in any conventional sense, but it was honest. That evening, I sat cross-legged on the floor eating takeout from a white carton. The noodles were too salty and the plastic fork bent with each bite, but I realized halfway through the meal that no one was correcting my posture, my choices, or my appetite. I could leave the carton on the floor if I wanted. I could eat in silence. I could turn on the television or leave the room quiet. I could exist without being observed. When night fell, I spread a blanket on the mattress resting directly on the floor. The ceiling above me was plain, faintly marked by a hairline crack stretching from one corner to the other. I traced it with my eyes, following its uneven path like a map leading somewhere unknown. In the distance, a siren wailed briefly, then faded. I waited for the familiar tension that used to arrive at bedtime, the anticipation of criticism, the careful mental review of the day's interactions, the subtle preparation for tomorrow's expectations. It never came. Instead, my body sank into the mattress, muscles loosening as though releasing years of stored vigilance. My breathing slowed. The quiet wrapped around me like something protective rather than suffocating. I slept. Not the light, fragile sleep of someone braced for interruption, but deep, uninterrupted rest. When morning light filtered through the window, pale and indirect, I opened my eyes and felt an unfamiliar sensation. Peace. The room was small. My bank account was modest. My future was uncertain. Yet nothing in my chest felt tight. For the first time in years, there were no footsteps approaching, no voice shaping my day before it began. I lay there listening to my own breathing, realizing that what looked like nothing from the outside was, in truth, space wide enough to rebuild a life. I had started over with almost nothing, and I had never felt so unburdened. The first time I unlocked the small storage drawer beneath my new desk, I hesitated before pulling it open completely. Inside sat a slim external drive, a worn leather sketchbook, and a neatly labeled folder of printed concept drafts, items so ordinary they would have meant nothing to Daniel. To me, they were the foundation of everything. When Daniel took the company, he took the name, the office lease, the vendor contracts, and the client lists. On paper, he retained the entire structure of the business we had built together. Anyone reviewing the divorce settlement would assume the creative engine remained intact. But businesses are not walls and paperwork. They are ideas. They are vision. They are instinct. And those had never belonged to him. Over the years, I had developed a quiet habit of saving my original design concepts separately before submitting finalized versions to clients. At the time, it was simply professional caution, proof of authorship in an industry where inspiration often blurred into imitation. I archived early drafts, lighting studies, texture combinations, and annotated sketches detailing my creative process. Those files now sat safely under my maiden name, time-stamped and traceable. Daniel had never asked about them. He wasn't interested in the evolution of ideas. He preferred outcomes, polished presentations, signed contracts, measurable profit margins. Creativity, to him, was valuable only when it translated into revenue. He believed he owned the results. He never considered who created them. I plugged the drive into my laptop and opened a folder labeled Signature Concepts. Dozens of projects appeared on the screen, layered mood boards, hand-drawn elevations, and color studies that once defined our firm's reputation. As I scrolled, memories surfaced. Late nights experimenting with shadow and light, the satisfaction of discovering unexpected harmony between textures, the quiet thrill of seeing a space transform from sterile to soulful. For years, I had watched clients fall in love with those details while Daniel discussed timelines and invoices. Now, the work returned to me without mediation. I began organizing the files, refining notes, and updating measurements for modern materials. I photographed my sketches in natural light and created digital portfolios free from the firm's branding. Without the pressure to conform to market expectations, I found myself revisiting ideas Daniel once dismissed. Too emotional, too bold, too personal. Those were the designs that made my pulse quicken. I set up a small work area by the window, where the muted light softened shadows across the desk. Each morning, I brewed coffee and reviewed a single concept, allowing myself to adjust, refine, and sometimes completely reimagine it. The process felt less like work and more like remembering a language I had once spoken fluently. Outside, life moved in ordinary rhythms, neighbors leaving for work, children's voices drifting from the stairwell, the rumble of buses in the distance. Inside, something quietly powerful was taking shape. Daniel had taken the business structure, but he had left behind the creative heart that gave it life. And hearts, unlike contracts, cannot be transferred by signature. They remain with the person who built them. As I saved the updated portfolio under my own name, I felt a steady certainty settle in my chest. He had taken what he believed mattered. I was reclaiming what truly did. The first design I shared online took less than a minute to upload and nearly an hour to post. I stared at the publish button far longer than necessary, my finger hovering above the trackpad as doubt whispered familiar questions. What if no one notices? What if no one cares? What if Daniel was right? The name displayed at the top of the page was my maiden name, one I had not used professionally in over a decade. Seeing it there felt both strange and deeply grounding, like reclaiming a voice I had once abandoned. I clicked publish before I could overthink it. The post was simple, a lighting concept designed to soften sharp architectural lines using layered shadows and warm, reflective surfaces. No corporate branding. No marketing language. Just images and a brief caption explaining the emotional intention behind the design. Then I closed the laptop and made tea, determined not to refresh the page every 30 seconds. By evening, the post had received 12 likes. 9 from accounts I didn't recognize. 2 days later, a small boutique hotel in another city sent a message asking whether the concept was available for consultation. I reread the message 3 times before replying, carefully balancing professionalism with honesty. I quoted a modest fee, half expecting silence in return. They accepted within the hour. That first project paid less than a single design consultation for my former firm. Yet when I transferred the payment into my new account, I felt a quiet surge of satisfaction that far exceeded the amount. This income was mine. No mediation. No oversight. No approval required. I continued posting twice a week. Textures, spatial compositions, lighting experiments, and restored versions of earlier concepts Daniel had rejected. My audience grew slowly but steadily. Designers began sharing my work. A local artisan furniture maker asked to collaborate. A lifestyle magazine requested permission to feature one of my interior transformations in an upcoming issue. Each inquiry felt like a small knock on a door I had rebuilt with my own hands. I worked from my kitchen table, surrounded by material samples, pencils, and open notebooks. Morning light crept across the surface as I sketched, shifting gradually from pale gray to warm gold. The apartment often smelled of coffee and tracing paper, an oddly comforting combination that signaled momentum. Some days were quiet, filled with drafting revisions and sourcing sustainable materials. Other days brought a flurry of emails, measurements, and video consultations conducted with clients who valued not just aesthetics, but the feeling a space could evoke. For the first time, I chose projects aligned with my vision rather than market trends. For the first time, I spoke directly with clients without my ideas being filtered through someone else's priorities. 6 months passed almost without my noticing. My calendar filled. My waiting list extended to 3 months. I upgraded from my kitchen table to a second-hand drafting desk placed beside the window, where light fell evenly across my work surface. One afternoon, while reviewing project timelines, I realized I had not checked Daniel's company website in weeks. The thought of it no longer tightened my chest. My work was no longer defined by what I had lost. It was defined by what I was building. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the soft scratch of pencil against paper as I refined a new concept, and felt a steady sense of ownership settle within me. Not of property, not of status, but of myself. For the first time in years, my identity was not an extension of someone else's vision. It was entirely my own. I didn't notice the first sign right away. My days had developed a steady rhythm, mornings spent sketching, afternoons consulting with clients across time zones, evenings refining material selections and responding to inquiries. Work arrived with a consistency that felt organic rather than forced, and for the first time, success did not feel like performance. It felt like alignment. The message that shifted my attention appeared on a Tuesday morning. Subject: Quick question. The sender's name was familiar, a hospitality client we had worked with years earlier through Daniel's firm. I opened the email cautiously. Were you the primary designer on the Harbor Point project? We're reviewing new proposals and noticed a significant change in aesthetic direction. We wanted to clarify before moving forward. I stared at the screen, reading the sentence twice. Significant change in aesthetic direction. I typed a polite, neutral response confirming my role in the original design while wishing them success with their current renovations. I made no comparisons, offered no criticism, and closed the message without revisiting it. 2 days later, another inquiry arrived. Then another. Some were subtle, phrased as curiosity. Others were direct. The recent concepts feel different. Did your team change? A colleague mentioned you may be working independently now. We're looking for the design sensibility your previous projects had. Are you accepting new clients? I answered carefully, never referencing Daniel, never explaining the divorce, never positioning myself in opposition. I simply presented my current work and availability. Meanwhile, industry newsletters began featuring my designs, crediting the distinctive emotional layering that had once defined Daniel's firm. A trade publication published a short profile describing my approach as restorative and human-centered, language that resonated deeply with the audience our former firm once attracted. Curiosity, in design circles, travels quickly. Late one evening, against my better judgment, I visited the company website Daniel now solely owned. The layout remained polished, the branding unchanged, the photography immaculate. At first glance, everything looked the same, but the new portfolio felt different. Technically correct, visually expensive, emotionally hollow. Spaces appeared staged rather than lived in, balanced but lacking the subtle warmth that invited people to linger. The lighting was precise yet cold. The textures coordinated but did not converse. It was beautiful and forgettable. I closed the page without judgment, feeling neither triumph nor bitterness, only recognition. A week later, I received a forwarded message from a contractor I had collaborated with years earlier. Clients keep asking for the old design direction. Something's missing. I set the phone down and returned to my drafting table, where a new residential project lay in progress. Warm walnut tones intersected with brushed brass accents. Natural fibers softened structural lines. Light flowed through layered panels designed to shift ambience from morning brightness to evening calm. This was the work that had once built our reputation. Now, it was building my future. Across town, Daniel still possessed the office, the brand, and the infrastructure he had fought to secure. But clients were beginning to understand something he never had. The structure was never the soul. And without the soul, even the most polished success begins to fracture quietly, almost imperceptibly, until one day, the absence becomes impossible to ignore. I sharpened my pencil and continued sketching, listening to the soft rhythm of graphite against paper. Somewhere in the distance, a chapter of my past was unraveling, and I felt only the steady forward motion of what came next. It was a crisp morning when Daniel showed up outside my small studio, unexpected and unannounced. I had just finished arranging a series of mood boards on the wall, each representing a new residential project I was about to present to a client. The air smelled faintly of cedar, paper, and fresh paint. Ordinary, comforting mine. When I opened the door, there he was, the man who had once controlled every detail of my life, standing with a hesitant expression that seemed out of place on someone so accustomed to certainty. The tailored suit hung on him like armor, but the weight of it didn't disguise the subtle slump in his shoulders. Time, it seemed, had begun quietly reclaiming him. I didn't realize, he started, his voice low, uncertain. You were the business. I studied him for a long moment. The man who once negotiated contracts and curated every external impression of our firm now looked smaller, diminished in the way someone becomes when the foundations they believed solid begin to crumble. You took everything, I said calmly, my tone soft but firm. He nodded, swallowing something he didn't name aloud. Yes. And somehow, I lost it all. I didn't argue. I didn't gloat. There was no satisfaction in rubbing salt into wounds, no joy in proving a point. Instead, I stepped aside and gestured toward the studio. Look around. Everything you think you wanted, it's here with me. But what really mattered wasn't yours to take. He followed my gaze across the room, sketches pinned with care, files neatly organized, digital portfolios open on the table, a small pile of client emails that had been forwarded to me directly. Everything Daniel had assumed he had captured, the company, the structure, the name, now belonged in part to the new world I had quietly built without confrontation. Daniel shifted uncomfortably. I thought winning meant taking everything. The house, the accounts, the firm. And you did take them, I said. But what you couldn't take was the heart behind it. The creativity, the vision, the reason people came to us in the first place, that stayed with me. That was never yours to control. He looked away, glancing at the sketches of layered textures and warm, inviting spaces. I watched him process the truth, the realization settling slowly across his face. Victory, in the way he had always defined it, had never been real. I closed the door gently, the sound echoing softly across the quiet street. Outside, the morning sun glinted off the studio windows, casting shadows across the wall that shifted and stretched with the light. I breathed in deeply, the scent of fresh beginnings filling me. Daniel had believed he had taken everything, the tangible, the visible, the easy-to-measure assets. But in truth, what he really took was the burden of responsibility, the weight of control, and the illusions that had constrained him and me alike. And what I reclaimed, my freedom, my voice, my identity, was far greater than anything he could have imagined. For the first time, I realized fully, sometimes letting go is the only way to truly win.